3 weeks ago, I signed away everything I had to my soon-to-be ex-husband. The house in Scottsdale, both cars, the property management company, the investment accounts, even the furniture he cared more about than the life we had built around it. My attorney leaned in so fast her chair scraped the courtroom floor. "Amelia, don't do this." Across the aisle, Grant gave me the same polished smile he used at investor dinners, the one that said he had already arranged the outcome before anyone else stepped into the room. His mother sat behind him in a pale blue suit, satisfied and still, like she was attending the final scene of a play she had personally funded. And Lila, 28, glossy hair, perfect lipstick, the woman Grant swore was just helping with branding, actually lifted her phone and snapped a picture while the clerk shuffled our papers. I signed anyway. Grant's smile widened. Then it vanished. Not slowly, not gracefully. It disappeared all at once when his lawyer turned to page 46, stopped breathing for a second, and said, in a voice I will never forget, "Grant, what exactly did you think you were taking?" That was the moment everyone in the room finally understood something I had known for a long time. A person can look quiet and still be 10 steps ahead. Before I tell you how we got there, let me take you back to the night I opened the wrong cabinet in my husband's office and found out my marriage had been balanced on a lie. Before I tell you what happened in that courtroom, subscribe if you believe quiet people are often the ones who see the most. And if you're listening tonight, tell me your city. I've learned strength sounds different when it comes back from somewhere else. 8 years earlier, I had married Grant Mercer under strings of cafe lights in Sedona, believing calm men were safe men. He was 36 then, I was 31. He wore certainty like a tailored suit. He spoke in decisions, not conversations. At the time, I mistook that for stability. By the time our son Owen turned 5, I understood the difference. Grant did not want a partner, he wanted a witness. And for too many years, I stood there quietly, watching him write our life in a language that always left me out. There's a difference between being cared for and being managed. I didn't understand that at first. In the beginning, Grant framed everything as protection. "I'll handle the finances," he told me on our honeymoon, pouring wine like it was part of a ritual he'd perfected. "You shouldn't have to worry about numbers, just focus on the home." It sounded generous, thoughtful even. Back then, I was still working as a financial analyst for a mid-sized firm in Phoenix. I liked my job. I liked the quiet logic of spreadsheets, the clean honesty of numbers that didn't pretend to be something they weren't. But when I got pregnant with Owen, Grant sat me down at our kitchen island, the marble cold under my palms. "This is a critical time," he said. "For the baby, for us. My income is more than enough." He didn't ask. He never really asked. And I agreed. Not because I fully wanted to, but because I had grown up in a house where every disagreement turned into a storm. Doors slamming, voices rising. My mother crying in the bathroom where she thought no one could hear her. I told myself peace was worth compromise. So I left my job. At first, it felt like a soft landing. Mornings with Owen, walks through quiet neighborhoods, afternoons that stretched gently instead of collapsing under deadlines. But slowly, almost invisibly, the structure of my life changed. The credit cards came in Grant's name. The bank accounts moved to his control. Statements stopped arriving at the house. "If you need anything, just use the card," he'd say, handing me one with a limit that felt intentional. Not small enough to question. Not large enough to be free. When I mentioned maybe doing some freelance work once Owen started preschool, Grant barely looked up from his phone. "Why?" he asked. "I want to keep my skills sharp." He shrugged. "If it makes you feel productive?" "If it makes you feel productive?" That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Because it wasn't about contribution. It was about permission. And somewhere along the way, without a conversation, without a fight, I had become someone who needed it. If you've ever felt that shift when your independence doesn't disappear all at once, but gets replaced piece by piece, you know how quiet it is. No alarms. No clear moment to point to. Just a slow realization that the life you're living, no longer fully belongs to you. Owen noticed the silence before I did. Children always do. He was 5 the first time he asked a question I didn't know how to answer. Why does Dad only talk to you when he needs something? We were sitting on the living room floor, building a crooked tower out of blocks that kept collapsing no matter how carefully he stacked them. Sunlight came in through the windows, warm and soft, the kind of afternoon that should have felt safe. I paused, one block in my hand. What do you mean? I asked gently. Owen shrugged, like it wasn't a big thing. He talks to you about bills, or when something's wrong, but not like how you talk to me. I smiled, but it didn't reach my chest. Grown-ups are just different, honey. He accepted that answer too easily. That was the part that stayed with me. Grant had a way of being present without actually being there. He'd walk into the house already on his phone, voice low, pacing from room to room like the walls themselves were just background. He missed Owen's first full sentence because he was closing something important. Missed his kindergarten orientation because of a client dinner. Missed bedtime so often that Owen stopped asking when he'd be home. One night, though, he did ask. We had waited. Owen in his pajamas, holding his favorite dinosaur book, sitting by the front window like he could will the headlights to appear. He said he'd read tonight, Owen whispered, not looking at me. I know. I texted Grant. No response. Called. Voicemail. By 9:15, Owen fell asleep against my shoulder, the book still open in his lap. Grant came home at 11:08. I remember the time because I had been watching the clock without meaning to. He smelled like a cologne he didn't own. Did you forget? I asked quietly. He loosened his tie, not even meeting my eyes. Amelia, I'm building something for this family. Owen will understand that one day. But Owen didn't understand. The next morning, when he realized his dad had come home and never said goodnight, something small shifted in his face. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet adjustment. Like he was learning not to expect too much. That was the moment something shifted in me too. Not anger. Not yet. Just a question I couldn't ignore anymore. What exactly are we building if the people inside it keep feeling smaller? And if you've ever watched someone you love start adjusting their expectations just to avoid being disappointed, you know how heavy that realization feels. That was the night I stopped waiting for Grant to become someone else. I just hadn't figured out yet who I needed to become instead. The night everything changed, I wasn't looking for answers. I was looking for Owen's passport. His class had planned a small international day at school, and somehow that had turned into needing documents I hadn't touched in years. Grant kept everything important in his office locked, organized, off limits, in a way that had never been explicitly stated but always understood. That night he forgot to lock it. A small mistake. The kind that doesn't feel like anything until it is. I opened the cabinet where he said our documents were kept. The passport was there, right where it should have been. But as I pulled it out, a stack of envelopes shifted behind it. Thick. Unopened. Stamped in red. My hand paused. There's a moment right before you know something will change when your body gives you a quiet warning, a hesitation, a chance to step back. I didn't. I slid the first envelope out. Final notice. The words felt louder than they should have been. I opened it. 90 days past due. $218,000 outstanding. I frowned, more confused than alarmed. Maybe it was a business account, maybe something temporary. Then I opened another. And another. Different banks. Different amounts. Same language. Delinquent. Immediate action required. Final attempt before escalation. By the fourth letter my hands had gone completely still. Not shaking. Just still. Like my body had decided panic wouldn't be useful. I sat down in Grant's chair slowly, the leather cold beneath me, and started organizing the papers the way I used to at work by lender, by amount, by timeline. The pattern became clear faster than I wanted it to. Multiple properties. Over-leveraged. Refinanced. Refinanced again. Credit lines stretched across accounts like thin threads holding too much weight. And then the number that made everything settle into place. just under $3.9 million. Debt. Not assets. Debt. I leaned back in the chair and looked around his office, the framed certificates, the clean desk, the expensive watch box slightly open on the shelf. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. The life I thought we were living didn't exist. At least not the way I had believed. And here's the part that surprised me most. I didn't cry. I didn't feel betrayed in that loud, cinematic way people talk about. I felt clear. Like a fog had lifted so quietly I almost missed it. So I did what made sense to me. I took out my phone, and I documented everything. Every letter, every amount, every date. Carefully, steadily, without rushing. Then, I placed each paper back exactly where I found it, closed the cabinet, turned off the light, and walked out. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because my mind had already shifted into something else. Not reaction, not denial. Something quieter, something sharper. I wasn't trying to save my marriage anymore. I was trying to understand the truth. And once you see the truth clearly, you don't unsee it. You just decide what you're going to do with it. The next morning, I called the one person who had never been impressed by Grant. Rachel Kim. We had met in college late nights, cheap coffee, shared textbooks, and shared truths. She was the kind of friend who didn't fill silence just to make it comfortable. She noticed things, said less, but meant more. Years ago, after meeting Grant for the first time, she had pulled me aside and said quietly, "I don't know what it is yet, but something about him doesn't add up." I didn't listen then. I was listening now. "I need a favor," I told her over the phone. She didn't ask why. "Come by my office." Rachel worked at a regional bank in Phoenix, the kind of place where people still looked at documents carefully instead of just trusting summaries. I brought my ID and the copies I had saved. We sat across from each other in a small glass room, sunlight cutting across the table between us. "I need to understand what's tied to me," I said. "Legally, financially, everything." Rachel nodded once and started working. What followed over the next 2 hours felt less like a conversation and more like an unveiling. Accounts, loans, corporate structures, personal guarantees. Some of it was exactly what I had already seen. But then she paused. "Amelia." There was something in her tone that made my stomach drop, not sharply, but steadily. She turned her screen toward me. "These 2 loans," she said, pointing. "They're co-signed." I leaned in. My name was there. Clear. Typed. Attached to amounts I had never agreed to. "I didn't sign these." Rachel's jaw tightened slightly. "I know." Silence filled the room, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy with implication. "This is fraud," she said carefully. "You could report it." I stared at the screen, at my own name, at the version of me that had been used without permission. "I'm not ready to do that yet." Rachel studied me for a moment. "Then what are you ready for?" I took a slow breath. The full picture. And that's where everything shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with intention. I opened a new account at a different bank, one Grant had never used. Small deposits at first. Freelance work I quietly expanded. 200 here, 300 there. Nothing that would draw attention. Everything that would build something. I documented more carefully than ever. Emails, statements, timelines, patterns. And I waited. Not passively, but deliberately. Rachel checked in with me every few weeks. "The numbers aren't improving," she said once. I didn't expect them to, because by then, I understood something Grant didn't. This wasn't a temporary dip. This was collapse in slow motion. And he was still performing success like the stage hadn't already started sinking beneath him. If you've ever been the only person in a room who sees what's actually happening, you know how strange that feels. You don't rush to speak. You don't panic. You prepare. Quietly. And if this part of the story feels familiar, watching, understanding, staying still while something bigger unfolds, just know this. You're not behind. You're early. I didn't need to expose him. I just needed to stop being exposed with him. And that decision changed everything that came next. About a year later, the details started slipping. Not all at once. Just enough. A scent that didn't belong to me. A message that disappeared too quickly. A tone in Grant's voice that shifted when he said certain names. If I hadn't spent months training myself to notice patterns, I might have missed it. But I didn't miss much anymore. It started with small things. New suits Tom Ford, he mentioned, casually charged to accounts I already knew were stretched thin. Late meetings that extended past midnight. Investor dinners that happened 3 nights in a row. And then, the name. Lila. He said it too easily. Too often. She's helping with the new branding direction. Lila has great instincts for market positioning. Lila thinks we should expand into short-term luxury leasing. Always Lila. Always just enough explanation to sound legitimate. One evening, he stood in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting his tie, studying his reflection like it was something he needed to convince. You should put more effort into your appearance, he said without turning around. Professional women understand that presentation matters. I looked down at what I was wearing. A simple dress I'd owned for years. Clean, comfortable. Mine. I thought I was doing okay, I said. He gave a soft laugh. You're fine, Amelia. Just not competitive. Not competitive. The words didn't sting the way they used to. They clarified something. This was no longer a marriage. It was a comparison. And I had already stepped out of the competition. A few nights later, he left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. The screen lit up. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Tomorrow night, wear the blue tie. I like it on you. A heart. A name. Lila. That was enough. I turned the screen face down and went back to rinsing Owen's lunch container like nothing had happened. Because here's the truth I had learned by then. You don't need confirmation when the pattern is already complete. You don't need confrontation when the outcome is already clear. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even angry in the way people expect. I was finished. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just internally. Grant thought he was hiding something. But what he never understood was this. By the time someone becomes careless, they've already lost the version of you that would have fought to keep them. And I wasn't fighting anymore. I was observing, collecting, waiting. If you've ever reached that point where the truth doesn't break you, it settles you, you know how quiet that shift is. It doesn't look like strength from the outside. It looks like distance. But that distance, that's where clarity lives. And clarity doesn't rush. It just waits for the right moment to become undeniable. The first time I met Lila in person, she was standing in my place. Not metaphorically. Literally. It was Grant's mother's birthday dinner, one of those carefully staged evenings where everything matched, including expectations. The house in Paradise Valley was immaculate, the kind of clean that felt more like a display than a home. I had been attending those dinners for 8 years. Always polite. Always slightly out of place. That night, Grant walked in with her beside him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Everyone, he said smoothly, this is Lila. She's been working closely with me on some new ventures. Working closely. She smiled, stepping forward with practiced ease. Blonde, polished, dressed in something expensive, or something meant to look it. I've heard so much about all of you, she said. Her eyes passed over me briefly. Not unkind. Just dismissive. Like I was part of the background she hadn't been introduced to properly. Grant's mother, Evelyn, lit up in a way I had never seen directed at me. Finally, she said, taking Lila's hands. Someone who understands ambition. Then, almost as an afterthought, she turned to me. Amelia, could you help in the kitchen? Of course. I moved automatically, like I had been trained to. From the kitchen doorway, I watched the scene unfold. Lila laughing at something Grant said. Evelyn leaning in, approving. Relatives nodding along. And my seat, my actual chair, occupied by someone who hadn't been there long enough to understand what it meant. Owen tugged gently on my sleeve. Mom, he whispered. Who is that? I knelt down to his level. No one you need to worry about, I said softly. Because the truth was, she wasn't. Lila wasn't the problem. She was the symptom. The real issue was sitting at the head of the table, performing a life that no longer existed. At one point, Lila lifted her bag onto the table, something structured, designer-looking. But the stitching was slightly off. The hardware didn't quite match. It was a detail most people would miss. But I had spent years working with financial audits, luxury assets, real numbers behind polished surfaces. And I recognized something instantly. Not everything that looks expensive holds value. I turned back to the kitchen before anyone could notice me watching too closely. And for the first time that night, I felt something settle deep inside me. Not jealousy, not humiliation. Perspective. Because while they were busy replacing me in a space I had outgrown, they had no idea what they were actually inheriting. If you've ever been quietly pushed out of a room you used to belong in, you know this feeling. At first, it feels like loss. Until one day, you realize you didn't lose your place. You outgrew the need to stay. And once that clicks, you stop trying to be seen by people who were never really looking at you in the first place. Grant asked for the divorce 6 months later. No warning. No build-up. Just a sentence dropped across the dining table like it had been sitting in his mouth for weeks, waiting for the right moment to sound inevitable. I think it's time we end this. I was stirring Owen's pasta when he said it. Steam rising. Something simple. Ordinary. That was the strange part, how something so final can arrive in the middle of something so small. I turned off the stove before I answered. Okay, I said. Grant blinked. Not because he was unsure, because that wasn't the reaction he had prepared for. I've already spoken to an attorney, he continued, leaning back in his chair, settling into the version of himself that handled outcomes. We can keep this clean if you cooperate. Clean. That word again, like everything he did, came wrapped in justification. What does clean look like to you? I asked. He folded his hands together, calm, measured. I keep the house, the vehicles, the company, all associated accounts and properties. He said it the way someone lists items they already own. And me? I asked. A small pause. You'll have Owen. Not custody. Not parenting. Not responsibility. Just Owen. Like he was something being left behind. The kid would complicate things for me right now, Grant added, almost casually. Travel. Expansion. It's not the right timing. The kid. I let that sit in the air between us. You're sure? I asked quietly. You want everything? Yes. All assets, all properties, all accounts. He gave a small smile. Amelia, I built all of it. Let's not pretend otherwise. I held his gaze. For a second longer than he expected. Then I nodded. All right. That was it. No argument. No negotiation. Just agreement. And for the first time since I had known him, Grant looked slightly unsettled. Not because of what I said, but because of what I didn't. He had prepared for resistance, emotion, maybe even desperation. What he got instead was stillness. And stillness makes people nervous when they're expecting noise. I'll have my lawyer send the paperwork, he said, recovering quickly. Take your time reviewing it. I will, I said. And I meant it. Because by then I understood something he didn't. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a transfer. He thought he was taking control of the outcome. But all he was really doing was stepping fully into it. If you've ever had someone assume your silence means you're losing, you already know how this part feels. It's not weakness. It's timing. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Because the moment you stop arguing for your place, you start choosing where you actually belong. Grant's lawyer expected me to fold the moment I sat down. I could see it in the way he greeted me polite, but already finished with the outcome. His name was Daniel Reeves, late 50s, expensive suit, controlled voice, the kind of man who had spent decades turning complicated situations into clean wins for clients like Grant. We met in a high-rise office overlooking downtown Phoenix. Glass walls, minimal decor, everything designed to make you feel small without saying it out loud. Grant sat beside him, relaxed, almost bored. Like this was a formality. "Mrs. Mercer," Daniel began, sliding a thick folder across the table. "My client has prepared a comprehensive settlement proposal. Given the circumstances, we believe it is more than reasonable." More than reasonable. I opened the folder. Page after page of structured language, carefully written to sound balanced while giving away everything. The house. The vehicles. Mercer Property Group. Investment accounts. Future interests. Everything transferred to Grant. In exchange, my personal belongings. And Owen. No alimony. No share of the business. No compensation for years of unpaid contribution. Nothing. I read slowly. Not because I didn't understand. Because I wanted them to think I was trying to. Grant leaned back in his chair, watching me with a faint smirk. "She doesn't need separate counsel," he said, not even lowering his voice. "Amelia was doing part-time bookkeeping at best. This is a bit above her range." Daniel shifted slightly, uncomfortable. "I would still recommend." "It's unnecessary," Grant cut in. "She knows I built everything." I closed the folder gently. "I'll need a few days to review this," I said. Grant's eyebrows lifted. "That wasn't the script." "You can take all the time you want," he replied, a hint of irritation slipping through. "The outcome won't change." I met his eyes. "I understand." And I did. Just not in the way he thought. I stood, thanked Daniel for his time, and walked out without rushing, without reacting, without giving them anything to work with. In the elevator, alone, I let out a slow breath. Not relief. Not fear. Just alignment. Everything was moving exactly where it needed to. Because what Grant saw as confidence was actually exposure. He was speaking too freely, writing too much down, leaving a trail of assumptions that would matter later. And he still believed I didn't understand any of it. If you've ever been underestimated in a room where the stakes are real, you know how powerful that position can be. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to listen carefully and let people reveal themselves. Before the doors opened, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Same face, same posture, but something behind my eyes had changed. Not harder, just clearer. I wasn't walking away from that meeting empty-handed. I was walking away with confirmation. And sometimes, confirmation is more valuable than confrontation. Because once you see exactly how someone plans to take from you, you can decide, very precisely, how to let them. Within a week, the narrative had already been rewritten. Not in court. In conversations. At neighborhood gatherings I wasn't invited to. At school pickup lines where voices dropped just low enough to sound sympathetic. Amelia's dragging things out. I heard she's trying to take half the company. After everything he's given her, that's kind of unfair, don't you think? It spread fast. Faster than truth ever does. I noticed it in small ways. Texts that went unanswered. Conversations that ended too quickly. Smiles that carried just a little too much pity. One afternoon, a mom from Owen's school stopped me by the gate. "I heard about everything," she said softly. "It must be hard, realizing you two just weren't compatible." Compatible. I nodded politely. Because correcting people who have already chosen a version of the story rarely changes anything. That night, Evelyn called. She didn't waste time. Amelia, she said, her tone perfectly measured. I understand you're making this unnecessarily complicated. I haven't asked for anything, I replied. Good, she said. Then don't start now. A pause. Grant built that company from nothing. You lived comfortably because of him. Don't embarrass yourself by pretending you deserve more. I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the small plant Owen had insisted on buying last weekend. I'm not pretending anything. Then sign the papers, she said, sharper now. Dragging this into court will be humiliating, especially for Owen. There it was. The pressure point. Always the same. Control wrapped in concern. I'll review everything properly, I said. That's not necessary. It is for me. She exhaled, slow and cold. You're making a mistake. No, I said quietly. I'm making a decision. She hung up without another word. Later that night, after Owen was asleep, I sat at the small desk in the guest room of the apartment I had quietly rented. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms. Plain furniture. But it was mine. Ours. I opened the file I had been building for nearly 3 years. Documents. Photos. Statements. And then I found something new. A second mortgage. On the house. Filed 18 months earlier. No signature from me. No consent. Just Grant's name. And mine. Attached. I stared at it for a long time. Not shocked. Not even surprised anymore. Just certain. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was pattern. I took a photo, saved it, filed it, and closed the folder. Let them talk. Let them believe I was confused. Weak. Unprepared. People who underestimate you don't just misjudge your strength. They expose their own blind spots. And blind spots are where everything important happens. If you've ever had your story told incorrectly by people who weren't there, you know how tempting it is to correct them. But sometimes, silence isn't surrender. It's space. Space to prepare something that doesn't need defending later. And I wasn't interested in defending myself anymore. I was getting ready to step out of a story I no longer recognized, and into one that no one else would get to write for me. Rachel was the one who found her. Her name is Laura Bennett, she said, sliding a business card across the cafe table. She's not flashy, but she doesn't miss things. That was exactly what I needed. Not someone loud. Not someone aggressive for the sake of it. Someone who understood that the strongest position is the one built carefully. Laura's office sat in a renovated brick building just outside downtown. Warm lighting, bookshelves instead of glass walls. No intimidation, just quiet authority. She looked up when I walked in, studying me in a way that felt precise. Amelia Mercer, she said. Have a seat. Tell me everything. So I did. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just clearly. 3 years of documents. Debt structures. Forged signatures. Behavior patterns. The affair. The proposal. The pressure. I laid everything out on her desk in organized folders, each labeled, each complete. Laura didn't interrupt. She read. Took notes. Occasionally asked a question that cut straight to the point. When she finished, she leaned back slightly and looked at me not with sympathy. With respect. You've already done most of the work, she said. I didn't know how much I needed to hear that until that moment. I'm not here to fight him, I said. Good, she replied calmly. Because this doesn't need to be a fight. She turned one of the documents toward me. Arizona is a community property state. You could pursue half of everything. I shook my head slightly. Half of what? I asked. The assets are tied to nearly $4 million in liabilities. A small smile touched her lips. You understand the situation better than he does. I've had time. Laura nodded once. Then let me ask you something more important. She leaned forward. What do you actually want? The question sat there. Simple. But not easy. I thought about the house, the cars, The image of success Grant was so attached to. Then I thought about Owen. Our apartment. The quiet I had started to build. I want him to have exactly what he's asking for. Laura held my gaze for a long second. Then she reached for a legal pad. All right, she said. Then we're going to give him everything. She wrote quickly, efficiently. There's something called a full liability assumption clause. If structured correctly, whoever takes the assets also takes every debt attached to them. She underlined a line on the page. Completely, explicitly, legally binding. I felt something settle in my chest. Not excitement, not revenge, just alignment. He won't read it carefully, I said. Most people don't, she replied, especially when they think they're winning. She looked up at me again. But we will. And in that moment, everything became very simple. This wasn't about taking anything back. It was about letting him take everything. Fully. If you've ever reached a point where you stop asking for fairness and start choosing clarity instead, you know how powerful that shift is. I didn't need to win. I just needed to be free. And for the first time, the path to that freedom wasn't complicated anymore. It was precise, quiet, and already in motion. The pressure didn't stop. It just changed tone. Less direct. More insistent. Like a steady tapping meant to wear something down over time. Lila called first. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity has a way of slipping past logic sometimes. Amelia, she said, her voice soft in that practiced, almost sympathetic way. I hope this isn't inappropriate. I didn't respond right away. She filled the silence quickly. I just think it would be better for everyone if this moved along faster. Better for everyone. That's an interesting way to put it, I said. A small pause. Well, Grant and I are trying to move forward. There are some opportunities we're looking at, and the divorce timeline is making things complicated. Opportunities. Of course. He needed clean paperwork to secure new financing. To keep the image going just a little longer. I see, I said. If you could just sign soon, she added gently, it would really help. Help. I let the word sit between us. I'll take that into consideration, I said. And I meant it. Just not in the way she hoped. The email from Grant came later that night. No greeting. No softness. Just pressure. Dressed up as formality. Amelia. My patience is running out. If you don't sign within 2 weeks, I will proceed with legal action for unnecessary delay. This doesn't have to become complicated. Grant. I read it once. Then again. And saved it. Because every message like that added something useful. Not emotionally. Structurally. It showed urgency. Assumption. A pattern of control. I forwarded it to Laura. Her reply came 10 minutes later. He's documenting his own pressure. This helps us. I smiled slightly. Not because anything felt good, but because everything was consistent. A few days later, Evelyn left a voicemail. I don't understand why you're being so difficult, she said. You're not in a position to negotiate. I didn't call her back. There was nothing left to explain to people who had already decided who I was. But buried in all that pressure was something more important. A crack. Grant needed this finalized quickly. He wasn't just eager. He was dependent on it, which meant one thing. He hadn't adjusted his behavior. He was still building on top of something unstable. Still reaching for more. Still assuming it would hold. If you've ever watched someone double down instead of stepping back, you know how predictable that becomes. They don't slow down. They speed up. And speed makes people careless. That night, I reviewed the final draft Laura had prepared. 50 pages. Clear. Detailed. Complete. Page 46 held the clause. Simple language. No tricks. Just truth. Written where it couldn't be ignored. Unless someone chose not to see it. And I knew Grant. He wouldn't read carefully. Because he didn't believe he needed to. I closed the document and sat back in my chair. Everything was ready. All that was left was timing. If you're still here, listening, following each step of this, tell me something. Where are you listening from tonight? Because stories like this don't just belong to one place. They show up in different forms, in different lives. And sometimes, hearing that you're not the only one paying attention quietly makes all the difference. I wasn't rushing anymore. I was waiting. And waiting, when you understand exactly what's coming, doesn't feel like delay. It feels like control. The family meeting was Evelyn's idea. Of course it was. Let's handle this like civilized people, she said, as if civility had ever really included me. Her dining room looked exactly the way it always had: polished wood, crystal glasses, everything placed with intention. A space designed for control, disguised as tradition. Grant sat at the head of the table, Evelyn to his right. A few relatives scattered around like quiet witnesses, and me at the far end, exactly where they expected me to be. Amelia has agreed to move forward with the settlement, Evelyn began, not even glancing in my direction. She'll be signing the documents this week so we can all put this behind us. Grant smiled. Not warmly. Confidently. I knew she'd come around. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Still, present, but not participating in the version of me they were discussing. We should acknowledge that Grant is being very generous, Evelyn continued. Not everyone would handle this so reasonably. Reasonable. That word again. Like everything had already been decided, and my role was simply to accept it gracefully. You're lucky this is staying private, one of his cousins added. Court would be messy. I'm not interested in making anything messy, I said quietly. Grant leaned back slightly, satisfied. Then we're aligned. I nodded once. We are. That was all it took. No argument. No resistance. Just agreement. And just like that, the room relaxed. Evelyn smiled. The tension dissolved. They had what they wanted. Or at least, what they thought they did. From the doorway, I noticed Owen standing there, half hidden behind the wall, watching. His small face confused. Trying to understand a conversation no one had explained to him. I gave him a small smile. Soft. Reassuring. Because whatever this was for the adults in the room, for him it needed to feel safe. Not strategic. Not complicated. Just, okay. Good, Evelyn said, lifting her glass slightly. Then we can move forward like a family should. A family. I almost smiled at that. Not out of bitterness. Out of clarity. Because what they called family had always come with conditions. And I had finally stopped trying to meet them. After dinner, Grant walked me to the door. I appreciate you not making this difficult, he said. I looked at him. Really looked. At the confidence. The certainty. The complete absence of doubt. You're getting everything you asked for, I said. He nodded. Exactly. I held his gaze for a second longer. Then I said quietly, I hope it's enough. He frowned slightly, like he didn't understand the question. But he didn't ask. Because people who believe they've already won don't look for hidden meaning. They move forward. And that's exactly what I needed him to do. If you've ever had to sit in a room where your silence was mistaken for surrender, you know how strange that moment feels. Because inside, everything is already decided. They just don't know it yet. That night, as I drove back to the apartment, Owen asleep in the back seat, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief. Not fear. Just quiet certainty. The next step wasn't about convincing anyone. It was about letting things unfold, exactly the way they were already set to. The night before the hearing, everything felt smaller. Not in a bad way, just real. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of cars passing outside. Owen had fallen asleep early, his favorite stuffed fox tucked under his arm, one leg hanging off the side of the bed like he had forgotten to finish the day. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. There's a kind of stillness that only exists when your child is sleeping. Uncomplicated. Unquestioned. Safe. I walked in and pulled the blanket up over his shoulder, brushing his hair back gently. "Tomorrow's going to be okay," I whispered. I wasn't sure if I was saying it for him or for me. Back in the kitchen, the documents were spread across the table. 50 pages. Every line reviewed. Every clause intentional. Page 46 sat quietly in the middle of it all. Not hidden. Not disguised. Just there. Waiting to be read. Or not. I ran my fingers lightly across the edge of the paper, feeling the weight of everything it represented. 3 years. 3 years of noticing. Of documenting. Of choosing not to react before I understood. On the counter, I had set out what I would wear in the morning. A simple, navy blazer. White blouse. Nothing that asked for attention. Everything that felt like me. Next to it sat a small ring, my grandmother's. Thin gold band. A tiny sapphire. It wasn't worth anything in the way Grant measured value. But it had never been about that. It was something that had been given to me, without condition. And I kept it for that reason. I picked it up and slipped it onto my finger. A quiet reminder. Of where I came from. Of who I was before I started shrinking myself to fit someone else's version of a life. I sat down at the table and looked at the final page again. Signature lines. Spaces waiting to be filled. Everything ready. And for the first time since all of this began, I allowed myself to pause. Not to question. Just to feel. If you're listening right now, and you've ever stood on the edge of a decision that no one else understands, you know this moment. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. Steady. Almost peaceful. Because deep down, you already know what you're going to do. The fear doesn't disappear. It just stops leading. I closed the folder gently, turned off the kitchen light, and sat by the window for a while, looking out at a city that didn't know my story and didn't need to. Because tomorrow wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about getting even. It was about stepping out of something that had already ended, and choosing what came next. And whatever happened in that courtroom, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't walking in as the same person who had once asked for permission to exist in her own life. I was walking in, already free. The morning of the hearing was unusually calm. No rush. No chaos. Just a quiet kind of focus that settled in my chest the moment I woke up. I got Owen ready for the day like I always did. Breakfast, backpack, a quick check to make sure his shoes were on the right feet. Normal things, grounding things. "Are you coming to pick me up later?" he asked, looking up at me. "I will," I said, kneeling to his level. "Just like always." He nodded, satisfied. Children don't need full explanations. They just need consistency. I dropped him off at Rachel's place, kissed his forehead, and walked back to my car. The Honda started with the same familiar sound it always had. Reliable. Unimpressive. Mine. When I pulled into the courthouse parking lot, Grant's car was already there. Of course it was. He was early when something mattered to him. And today, mattered. I stepped out, smoothed my blazer, and took a slow breath before heading inside. The hallway outside courtroom 3B was already busy. Lawyers moving quickly. Couples sitting in silence. Paperwork being passed back and forth like quiet negotiations of lives no one else fully understood. Laura was waiting for me by the door. "Everything's in order," she said simply. I nodded. "I know." She studied me for a second. "You're very calm." "I've had time," I replied. And that was the truth. This wasn't happening to me. This was something I had been walking toward. She placed a hand lightly on my arm, brief, steady. "Whatever happens in there," she said, "you've already done the hard part." I met her eyes. "I'm not trying to win." "I know," she said. "That's why you will." She opened the door. Grant looked up immediately when I walked in. That same smile. Confident. Relaxed. Certain. Amelia, he said. Right on time. I took my seat beside Laura without responding. Across the aisle, his lawyer was flipping through the document again. Not casually. More carefully than before. There was a tension there now. Subtle, but present. Lila sat in the front row. Red dress. Perfect posture. Phone in hand. She glanced at me briefly, then back to her screen like I was already part of something that had ended. Evelyn sat beside her. Still. Composed. Certain. They had come to watch a conclusion. What they didn't realize was that they were watching a reveal. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Formalities began. Voices steady. Routine. On the surface, it looked like every other hearing happening that morning. But if you've ever been inside a moment where everything is about to shift, you know how different it feels from the inside. Time doesn't slow down. It sharpens. Every word lands a little clearer. Every pause means a little more. I folded my hands in front of me and looked straight ahead. Not at Grant. Not at anyone else. Because this wasn't about them anymore. It was about what had already been set in motion. And all that was left now was for it to unfold. Quietly. Exactly as it was written. The agreement was read into the record like it was nothing more than routine. Clinical. Measured. Unemotional. Mrs. Mercer agrees to relinquish all claims to the marital residence. The clerk's voice moves steadily through each line. The house. The cars. Mercer Property Group. Every account. Every holding. Every visible piece of the life Grant had built his identity around. I sat still, hands folded, listening. Not reacting. Not resisting. Just present. From the gallery, I could feel Lila leaning forward slightly, her attention sharpening with each item listed. Evelyn remained composed, but there was satisfaction in the way her shoulders settled deeper into her seat. This was what they had come to see. Confirmation. Closure. Victory. The clerk continued. And all associated business interests, financial accounts, and tangible assets shall be transferred to Mr. Grant Mercer in full. A pause. Then the judge looked up. Mrs. Mercer, she said, adjusting her glasses slightly, do you understand that by signing this agreement, you are relinquishing your rights to these assets? I do, Your Honor. And you've had sufficient time to review this agreement with your attorney? I have. No questions before we proceed? No, Your Honor. Across from me, Grant shifted slightly in his chair, satisfied. This was exactly how he imagined it. Simple. Efficient. Final. His lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, I'd like it noted that my client was advised to pursue independent financial review, but has chosen to waive that right. The judge turned to Grant. Mr. Mercer, is that correct? Grant didn't hesitate. I built this company. I know what I'm signing. Confidence. Unquestioned. Unchallenged. Very well, the judge said. Please sign the waiver. Grant took the pen. Signed. Smooth. Quick. Without reading again. I watched his hand move across the paper. Not with tension. With certainty. That was the moment. Not when he signed the final page. Not when the judge spoke. But right there. When he chose confidence over caution. If you've ever watched someone step fully into a decision they don't understand, you know how quiet that moment can be. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels inevitable. He flipped to the last page. Signed again. Set the pen down. It's done, he said. And for a second, everything held. Still. Balanced. Unaware. Then his lawyer reached for the document. Flipped pages. Stopped. Page 46. I saw it happen before anyone said a word. The shift. Subtle. But immediate. His posture changed. His hand froze. Grant, he said quietly. Grant frowned. What? A pause. Long enough for the room to notice. Not long enough for it to stop what was already in motion. Grant, his lawyer said again, slower this time. We need to talk. And just like that, the version of this story they thought they were living, it started to fall apart. If you're still here, following every step, every detail, stay with me. Because this is the part where everything looks the same on the surface. Until it doesn't. And what happens next? It doesn't come from anger. It comes from something much quieter. Truth. Finally being read out loud. Grant reached for the document, impatience already in his expression. What is it? He asked, irritation creeping in. It's done. His lawyer didn't answer right away. He turned the pages back slowly, like he was hoping he had misread something the first time. His finger stopped again on the same paragraph. Page 46, he said, voice tight. The liability clause. Grant exhaled sharply. What about it? The lawyer looked up at him, and for the first time since I had met him, he didn't look in control. Read it. Grant took the document, scanning quickly at first, still confident, still dismissive. Then slower. His eyes moved across the lines again, and then stopped. I watched the exact moment it landed. Not all at once. Piece by piece. The receiving party assumes full responsibility for all debts, liens, and financial obligations attached to the awarded assets. His voice trailed off. The room stayed quiet. Too quiet. Grant looked up. This means all associated liabilities, Laura said calmly beside me. In full. He shook his head slightly, like the words hadn't settled yet. This wasn't. You waived independent review, his lawyer said, almost under his breath. You signed it. Grant turned toward me then. Really looked at me. And for the first time in 8 years, he wasn't certain anymore. This is a mistake, Grant said, louder now. This isn't what we agreed to. His voice echoed slightly in the small courtroom, breaking the controlled rhythm that had carried everything up to this point. The judge looked over her glasses. Mr. Mercer, you signed a legally binding agreement. I didn't see this, he insisted, flipping the pages again like the words might rearrange themselves. This wasn't explained. It was included in the document you were given, Laura said, her tone even, in clear language. Grant turned sharply to his lawyer. Why didn't you flag this? I advised you to conduct a full financial review, his lawyer replied, tight, careful. You declined. I didn't think. No, the lawyer interrupted quietly. You didn't. That landed harder than anything else. From the front row, I heard movement. Lila leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. Grant, what does that mean? No one answered her. Because the meaning was already there. Plain. Unavoidable. Grant looked back down at the page, reading again, slower this time. Every word. Every line. No longer skimming. No longer assuming. Just understanding. And with that understanding, something shifted in his posture. Not just confusion, not just frustration. Loss. Not of money. Of control. Because for the first time, the version of reality he had been operating in was no longer holding. Grant pushed his chair back slightly, the sound sharp against the floor. This isn't fair, he said, quieter now but more strained. She knew what she was doing. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The judge's expression didn't change. Mr. Mercer, fairness is not determined by assumption. It's determined by what you signed. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before stopping himself. You're saying I take all the debt? Everything tied to those properties? Yes, Laura said calmly, as outlined in the agreement you accepted. Grant let out a breath that sounded more like disbelief than anger. That's almost $4 million. No one corrected him. Because that number had always been there. He had just never looked at it closely enough. From the gallery, Lila stood up slightly, her composure cracking for the first time. You told me the company was solid, she said. You said everything was expanding. Grant didn't answer her. He couldn't, because there was no version of this that matched what he had been saying. Evelyn, who had remained silent until now, rose slowly from her seat. Her face was tight, controlled, but there was something else beneath it. Embarrassment. She didn't look at me. She looked at Grant. And then she walked out. No words. No defense. Just distance. Grant stood there, document still in his hand, the weight of it finally real. Not because anything had changed, but because he had finally seen it. For a moment, no one moved. Grant stood there with the document in his hand, like it had suddenly gained weight he didn't know how to carry. The confidence that had followed him into the courtroom was gone, not replaced with anger, not even panic, just something quieter. Recognition. You knew, he said finally, looking at me. Not accusing. Not shouting. Just realizing. I met his eyes, steady. I understood what you were asking for. That's not the same thing, he said, but there was no force behind it. Laura closed her folder beside me. It is. Legally. Grant let out a breath and sat down slowly, like his body was catching up to something his mind had already accepted. Across the room, Lila had gone silent. Her phone rested forgotten in her hand, the performance of certainty gone with it. Whatever version of Grant she had believed in wasn't standing in front of her anymore. The judge reviewed the final page once more. Both parties entered this agreement voluntarily, she said. The court will uphold it as written. The gavel came down. Not loud, not dramatic, but final. And just like that, it was done. I stood, smoothing my blazer out of habit more than necessity. For a second, I let myself feel the room one last time. The place where I had been expected to lose everything. The place where I had quietly chosen not to. Grant didn't stop me when I turned to leave. He didn't call my name. He just sat there, staring at the paper that now defined his reality. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Not because I was trying to be strong, but because there was nothing left behind me that belonged to me anymore. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Simpler. Like something had been released. I reached my car, paused for a second, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. This wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. And clarity doesn't need noise. It just stays. If this story stayed with you in some quiet way, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told you didn't understand your own life, then you already know what this moment feels like. You don't always need to fight louder. Sometimes, you just need to see clearer. And when you do, everything else follows. If you understand that kind of quiet strength, you belong here.